welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I'm your host, Jessica, and I'm here with the author of a book that I am absolutely in love with, and I don't just say that lightly. It is just wonderful in so many ways. And yeah, I'd like you to introduce yourself and then tell us about this book.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for having me. My name is Emily Krempholtz, and I am the author of Violet Thistlewaite is Not a Villain Anymore, which is a cozy fantasy romance about a powerful plant witch, Violet Thistlewaite, who has spent her entire life working for an evil sorcerer. And after he's defeated, she thinks, you know what? I would like to turn over a new leaf and try my hand at being a good person. And so she leaves her life of crime and moves to a small town and opens a flower shop, much to the chagrin of the grumpy alchemist who lives next door. And the story kind of follows her as she tries her hand at being good for once. And unfortunately, a lot of her dark past comes knocking at her door, and she kind of has to grapple with whether a former villain ever truly deserves a happily ever after.
What I love about this book is that it's like really complex with the way it deals with all of that. I really felt for everybody in this book. I think like one thing that I've noticed with some cozy fantasy, with this, and then Sarah Beth Durst's books as well, is that there's almost like it happens in the aftermath of the climactic, there was this climactic fight with the bad guy, and you have like that fall, you're like in the midst of a falling action, but it's like how how does that work, right? Because okay, great, the evil has been defeated, but how long has this evil been in power? What are the things that kept him in power? How did it affect the people who were around him? And it was really just a nicely done story about somebody who, maybe she wasn't really evil at her core. Maybe she was groomed to be evil or groomed to think that she was. And between her and Nathaniel, who's the alchemist who lives next door with his sister, they're also recovering. And I really just enjoyed their stories and how it came together and how you kind of kept some mystery in a world where, okay, fine, so the big bad has been defeated, but that doesn't necessarily mean that war is over. So would you like to just talk a little bit about where the idea for this story comes from? Because I just kind of monologued my thoughts.
Yeah, no, and I love those thoughts too. I think, I absolutely wanted to explore some of those things. We often get to like a happily ever after in a book, and particularly, you see it a lot in like epic fantasy where the chosen one, the heroes, the band of heroes come in and they defeat evil, and the townspeople are so grateful, and now we'll just all go back to our lives and everybody lives happily ever after. But what about all those people in that town that's been ravaged by this force for years and years and years? What about the people who were part of this and on the fringes of this? And how can their lives go back to normal when they don't quite know what normal is? Was something I really wanted to explore. The actual idea from the book came from, this is so silly, but my partner was playing video games, and I walked into the room and he was fighting some like big bad evil guy. And there were all these little minions that, like in a video game, you're like fighting them first before you can get to the big bad. And we started riffing, and I was like, come on, you don't have to be so hard on those guys. Some of them have families. Like, you don't even know why they're here. That guy's just trying to pay the bills. Maybe that guy's just trying to put his kid through college. Maybe this one is saving up so she can leave and go open a flower shop. And, we were kind of riffing on that kind of stuff for a while. And it really got me thinking about, the minions of an evil villain and the people that, a dark sorcerer would surround themselves with, and why that person would surround themselves with other people, and what those people might think about that, and how much choice they might have in the matter. And so Violet really sprouted from that, a lot of those things, as well as my own kind of urge to explore the concept of change and explore the concept of transformation and what it takes to change. Because I think I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like I know a lot of people, myself included, who, when we're having a bad day at work or we're having a rough time, we think to ourselves, oh, I wish I could just leave it all behind and go open for me, it's always a bookstore bakery combo. I would love to open that, and surely all of my problems in life would go away if I could just go somewhere where nobody knows me, and I could start this new life, and I could live this perfect, idyllic little existence. And it's not that easy, Starting over is a lot more than what that fantasy would lead us to believe. And becoming a new person and just erasing the person you've been for your entire life is not as simple as just walking away and starting your little fantasy capitalism business and seeing where that takes you.
And I think what it really like speaks to is sort of looking at what makes somebody supposedly evil, or what the I don't I mean, certainly there are people who are gleefully complicit in certain
Yep.
situations, and I'm not necessarily saying that, but there's also people who might have like been sort of molded a certain way and don't realize it until it's too late. And I think, for Violet, that certainly was the case with her. For Nathaniel, he was born into the society where the oppression was already happening, and it was very hard not to somehow be a cog in the wheel. But what I liked about just the story in general is it was about recovery, but it was also about, making things right for yourself, making things right for like the world you live in. I don't necessarily know if reparations was kind of what you were going for, but there's a little bit of, just like recovery and coming to terms, which was really nicely done. The magic is super fun in it as well. How did you sort of come to world build? Were you like, do you have like favorite fantastical worlds that you sort of drew upon, or did it just kind of all come naturally?
A lot of it kind of came naturally. I'll be honest with you. I wanted to write plant magic, and so a lot of it grew from that. I also really wanted to play with a world where I had these three moons, and I kind of built some lore around them, and kind of then went down a lot of scientific rabbit holes about what exactly having three celestial bodies would do to a planet in terms of tide structures, in terms of how like seasons would work, and things like that. And I had to be very intentional about which of those things I was going to use and which of those things I was going to handiest waviest away and say this is fantasy. But I've always been really inspired by authors who create a sense of internal logic to their magic systems. I really like when magic feels like science. There's that quote that goes around. I don't know who it was originally attributed to, but that magic is just science we don't understand yet. And I've always really been drawn to that in stories. And I like when magic has that sense of logic and has that sense of like, okay, this makes sense to me. This works like this because the world works like this. And if this happens, then this happens. And so building a magic system that made sense was very important to me. And actually one of my final rounds of developmental editing was my editor came back to me and was just like, okay, I only have one note for you. And it's that we need to make this magic system a little simpler. Because I definitely got a little too scientific with it at times. And I'm very happy with where we landed, and I'm very happy with the way that worked out. But yeah, I like to play with magic that feels very logical and feels like there's that push and that pull and that balance to it. And that's something that the characters definitely explore throughout the story as well.
You did a really good job also of like helping us care about these characters, and I had an emotional stake in the romance, which I say a lot of times, like generally story comes first for me. I love romance, but I need to be emotionally invested in these characters to really care if they get together. And the story has to go hand in hand with that. And you did a really good job of building it. And there's definitely some nice, it's not like, full flame, but some good spice in this. Was that difficult for you to write? Like how did you sort of pace their relationship as it grew?
That was definitely something that progressed as like throughout the writing process. I knew from the beginning that I wanted there to be a really strong romantic element. I love romance books. I love reading books that have a strong romantic plot line. And I am very much, as a writer, to me, character is king. My characters are the vehicle through which the story progresses, and so I want everything that they experience and everything that they do to make sense to me, to the reader, to them themselves. So building their romance was something that I had a lot of fun with because the other thing that I love to do with a romantic, plot line is I like to have two characters who are approaching kind of a same core question from different angles. And in this case, it was very much that sense of change. Violet is somebody who very desperately wants to change. She wants to be a different person. She wants to be somebody who is completely new and good and very different than how she sees herself and who she was before. And on the other side, we have Nathaniel, who tried to make some changes, failed at making those changes, and now is very stuck in a rut. He very much believes, I can't change. There's no point in trying. I might as well just go back to this thing that I've always been expected to do. And he's very bitter about that. And so the two of them kind of like approaching that from different angles was where they began as characters. And then they kind of developed and grew and blossomed from there. And I found all of these different ways to kind of make them butt heads in interesting ways and make them have to ask hard questions of each other in interesting ways and make them help each other in interesting ways. Because that's the other thing is I want them to be able to be together, not just because they've been thrown into the same situation, but because they are each kind of helping each other with something. They are each helping the other realize something about themselves, about their own journey. And so building that and building that relationship between the two of them, when I approached it from that angle of making sure that those questions were being answered, making sure that they're coming at the center from two different sides, it kind of falls into place naturally if you're able to look at it from that sort of peel back the curtain, looking at all the cogs side of it.
And it definitely worked, and the surrounding cast was really good too. I don't want to talk too much about all of it because, there are just some really great characters, and I loved her plant, by the way.
Bartleby has been stealing hearts and knives from everybody, apparently. So
Yeah, he's pretty great. But I also just wanted to talk a little bit about, how you kind of build the backstory of the evil sorcerer whose name was Guy, which is like, his last name is Shadowfade. So mostly, you're talking about him as Shadowfade, and then like people are like, oh, Guy, the guy, which is kind of mundane and also a little funny. When, Violet for me, like, her name was perfect for her. It fit her. How did you come up with Guy being the name of the deceased evil sorcerer?
this is one of those jokes that I cannot believe made it through so many rounds of publishing without anybody being like, Emily, you can't do this. It literally started because I wanted him to be the bad guy. I wanted bad guy. And then in the town, there is also a side character whose name is also Guy. And, occasionally they're like, no, not bad guy, regular guy or good guy. And that it was a joke in my head that then I just kind of ran with. One of the things I love about cozy fantasy is I think it creates space for there to be a little bit more like slapstick humor in ways that a lot of traditional fantasy doesn't have room for. But yeah, no, originally I had named him, I think it was like Big Bad Evil Jeffrey or something, but like Jeffrey with a G. So it was still in gaming. You call a big bad evil guy a BBEG. And so I wanted that. And then it kind of progressed from there to just saying, no, he's the bad guy. Let's just call him Guy. But I think ultimately it ended up creating space for Guy Shadowfade to make the point of just like he's just a guy, he's just a person, and he's not infallible. Evil is not infallible, and that was something that is also very, very important for me to get across in this book. That change, being good, requires effort. It requires work. It requires consistency and persistency, and that is something I definitely wanted to get across. And then I also really wanted, to make the point that like evil is not it's not perfect. It is not infallible. It is something that can be defeated and requires work, but is possible.
I loved the book again. Is there a chance that we might see more of this world?
There is a chance, more than that. So I do have a second book in this world with some different characters, many of whom you might recognize. The first draft of the book is written and turned into my editor. I don't have more news and information than that right now, but yes, this is not the last you will be seeing of this world, and I'm very excited for some of the other stories that we'll be telling here in this place and in this setting.
Thank you so much. This was Jessica with Syosset Libraries' Turn the Page podcast. Read Violet Thistlewaight is not a villain anymore. And thank you, Emily, so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.